Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. In addressing the housing crisis, the federal government announced billions of dollars more will be invested to help with multi-unit home construction. The Alberta government announced a funding boost to help those from low-income homes afford transit passes. And the Muslim Association of Canada took issue with how politicians attacked parents during the recent 1 Million March for Children. Political reporter Brian Lilly will explain.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. House Speaker Anthony Rota has resigned. Rota faced calls from the NDP and even from Liberal cabinet ministers to step down after he invited a man who fought for the Nazis during the Second World War to attend Friday's speech by Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky.
It's with a heavy heart that I rise to inform members of my resignation as Speaker of the House of Commons. It has been my greatest honour as a parliamentarian to have been elected by you, my peers, to serve as the Speaker of the House of Commons for the 43rd and 44th Parliament. I reiterate my profound regret for my error in recognizing an individual in the House during the joint address to Parliament of President Zelensky. That public recognition has caused pain to individuals and communities, including the Jewish community in Canada and around the world, in addition to survivors of Nazi atrocities in Poland, among other nations. I accept full responsibility for my actions. My resignation is effective at the end of the sitting day tomorrow, Wednesday, September 27th, to allow preparations for the election of a new Speaker. Until that time, the Deputy Speakers will chair the House proceedings.
Now, with Rota resigning, he will lose certain perks, including an official residence that comes with his position of being Speaker of the House and a car allowance. He will also lose an additional $92,800 of salary on top of his base salary of $194,600. Lethbridge Conservative MP Rachel Thomas says she doesn't buy the fact that the Trudeau government did not know that Hunka was a Nazi. She says the Prime Minister must apologize and stop passing the blame to others, such as the Speaker of the House.
But here's what we know. We know that a list of guests was sent to the Prime Minister's office, that it was thoroughly vetted, and that the Prime Minister would have therefore known that this individual, this Nazi, was going to be in Parliament and was going to be honoured. And so ultimately, even though Anthony Rota is taking the fall for this, it is the Prime Minister's responsibility to stand up and own the ill actions that took place on Friday.
The federal government announced today that it is offering help to home builders to have access to more funding for new multi-unit home construction. Federal Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland says up to $20 billion will be unlocked from Canada mortgage bonds, with the funds going towards building more multi-unit rental projects.
This financing will make it easier for builders to access financing for construction projects like apartment buildings, student housing, and seniors' residences. There is no fiscal impact for the Government of Canada as a result of this measure. This is fiscally responsible policy using the policy tools at our disposal. And this is a further measure in our broader and continuing campaign to build more homes for Canadians faster. This new measure alone, announced and implemented today, will help to build up to 30,000 additional rental units every single year.
According to a recent report, the top 10% of income earners in Canada cannot afford the average price of a Canadian home. The study by the folks at DollarWise says the average house price is now $754,700. The minimum income required to purchase that home is just over $180,000. The top 10 earners in Canada earn between $174,000 to $176,000 per year, which is not quite enough. The report also goes on to say the increase in minimum income to qualify for a mortgage has risen almost $3,800 in Ontario and over $2,800 in British Columbia. The study also says with the average house price in Alberta being almost $475,000, you need an annual household income of just over $120,000. Federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh blasted the Trudeau government for not doing more to help bring down the cost of food. Singh says the rising cost of living continues to hurt Canadians and the federal government just isn't doing enough.
We know that Canadians continue to struggle with the high cost of groceries, making difficult decisions, making sacrifices when they go in to buy the food that they need. Given how serious things have been, and it's been 21 months that food inflation has outpaced general inflation, the Liberals' inaction has cost families thousands of dollars. They have done nothing to bring down the cost of groceries. And now they are making a show of taking action by meeting with the CEOs of grocery stores and with manufacturers. None of that is actually bringing down the price of groceries.
The Muslim Association of Canada took issue with so many politicians and school boards who attacked the recent 1 Million March for Children rallies. Now, many who opposed the marches, including counter-protesters, also called them hate-filled. Political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilly says from what he witnessed in Toronto, nothing could have been further from the truth.
I saw turban Sikh fathers at the rally. I saw Muslim mothers in their hijabs at the rally. I saw people from all backgrounds at the rally saying, leave our kids alone. The Trudeau government turned around and said, these are hate-filled rallies. This is a hateful position. The Muslim Association of Canada, which has been close to the Trudeau government at times over the years, they've come out with a statement blasting all politicians, but in particular the Prime Minister, for their characterization of parents.
Mr. Lilly will also have more details about how that former Nazi received a standing ovation in the House of Commons last week. Watch for that colorful interview coming up in the second half of our program. Well, it was a beautiful autumn day here in Lethbridge. Lots of color as well, with the yellow, the brown, and the green. Nice and warm once again. Jeanette Rocher is in now with a quick peek at the forecast. Jeanette, we should enjoy the warm temperatures while we can, since a cooling trend may be on the way.
Yeah, you know, Hal, you're not kidding. It was lovely out there today with that high of 24 degrees. Even this morning, I left the house with bare arms and bare legs. It was that warm. As for the rest of the week, though, we are looking at more into the teen temperatures beginning on Wednesday, high of 19, which is still higher than the average high for this time of year of 18 degrees. After that, we're going to be seeing more temperatures in the mid-teens and even a little bit lower, but I'll be back later in the show to give you all those details.
Thanks so much, Jeanette. The BC Wildfire Service's crews are now working to patrol the edge of the 139 square kilometre McDougall Creek wildfire, while also putting out any of the remaining hotspots. Communities near the blaze can expect to see more smoke in the coming weeks. This comes as Central Okanagan Emergency Operations announced it is rescinding evacuation orders and alerts for all but one property in West Kelowna. Thousands were evacuated from the region last month due to the fast-moving blaze. Almost half of the 400 structures or homes were destroyed in BC's record-breaking fire season so far. And this year, BC has seen 2,217 wildfires so far. There are 385 which are still considered active. 2 people are dead and 4 others were injured after a helicopter crashed in central British Columbia. The Transportation Safety Board says it is sending a team of investigators to the crash site where the chopper went down. It was located near the Purdon Ski Hill Mountain Resort east of Prince George. RCMP say the crash happened in a forested area without cell service, which was not easily accessible by emergency vehicles. The Alberta government is expanding low-income transit programs in 6 new communities across the province. Officials say the extra $1.7 million in additional funding will not only help support those in Edmonton and Calgary, but also cities such as Lethbridge, Red Deer, and Spruce Grove. Social Services Minister Jason Nixon says the province wants to do more to help those from low-income households obtain transit passes.
Now, we can serve more Albertans and support those living in smaller communities outside of Edmonton and Calgary. Low-income transit passes are just one way that we are helping individuals and families on a tight budget. We have paused the 13% per litre provincial fuel tax through the end of the year. And through our inquiry into renewables, we are seeking long-term solutions to be able to lower Albertans' electricity bills. In my Department of Community and Social Services, we are supporting nearly 12,500 households through our rent supplement programs, and work is underway through a $9 billion investment with our partners to build 25,000 new affordable homes across our province by 2031.
Officials say more than $14 million has already been allocated for low-income transit passes, including $6 million each for Calgary and Edmonton. The Blood Tribe Department of Health's wellness program celebrated its 100th day treatment program on Tuesday afternoon in Standoff. The celebration also coincides with this week being Truth and Reconciliation Week. The day treatment program began back in 2021. Now, a member with the Blood Tribe Department of Health explains its significance this week.
We are trying to showcase our success, not to the community, but outside community people, so that they know what we do here. And the most important thing is we are trying to neutralize the difference between the communities, and we are trying to make sure that we are not just limited to Blood Tribe. This is a program which is open to other communities as well. So to bring harmony, equality, and peace among communities.
To date, there have been 82 people who have graduated from the Health Wellness Program. A traditional buffalo winter count robe was unveiled Tuesday morning at Lethbridge College. It was a way the post-secondary is honoring National Truth and Reconciliation Week. The robe will be used as a teaching tool for students and faculty at the college. It was designed by artist William Singer, who worked on it over the summer months. He explains what the symbols on the robe actually mean.
With every robe, there's the beginning, and so at the beginning you see a sun, and next to the sun you see some plants and a moon. So the moon and the plants represent the month of June, and that was when the artwork started on the robe. And so from there, then we have a representation of a Napi effigy. Napi is our creator and our trickster. And so a lot of the knowledge that is transferred in the Blackfoot worldview, a lot of them are based on the Napi stories.
An official with the college explains the importance of unveiling the robe to our community.
This display and this project is a great opportunity for Lethbridge College to tell their story, but to tell the story through an Indigenous lens, a Blackfoot lens, and as we look at it, you know, it's definitely a story of reconciliation. It goes from the creation of this territory through our storytelling processes.
The robe will be displayed on the campus for everyone to learn from, but will also be taken to other commercial events, including convocations and classrooms. 2 new exhibitions at the Galt Museum and Archives are making sure the stories of residential school survivors are not forgotten. Both showcase first-hand stories from Indigenous peoples, including people from the Kainai First Nation or Blood Tribe. Video journalist Micah Quinn has that story.
It was really important to us as intergenerational survivors and survivors to be able to have the space to talk about what happened in these institutions.
According to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, more than 3,200 children died inside the residential school system, and hundreds more remain unidentified. The first exhibition at the Galt Museum is called Stolen Kainai Children, Stories of Survival, which sheds light on individual stories from Blood Tribe members during their time in the residential school system.
I never went to residential school, and that is one of the number of questions that I do get asked for my fellow tribe members who are also intergenerational survivors, is what happened, because our family members who did go through this don't really talk about it.
The second exhibition is titled Escaping Residential Schools, Running for Their Lives. Between the 2 exhibitions, there are currently over 24 stories that are on display.
So it's important for people to learn about those different methods that the government of Canada used, and how they were kind of a continuation of different attempts at assimilation of First Nations people in Canada.
The 2 exhibitions will be featured at the Galt Museum and Archives until March 3rd of 2024. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Much more is finally being done to protect the Blackfoot language and culture. Now that's according to Arnold Fox, who's the Director of Social Development for the Blood Tribe here in southern Alberta. Fox says it is sad, however, that many First Nations are losing their languages.
The major part of our task is to help preserve the Blackfoot language and to help the language itself move along and adapt to current terms that are used today in our everyday language. So that's why it's a dual function. We realize that a lot of First Nations across the country are losing the language. I believe there's some dire predictions that within 25 years, we will just have 3 First Nation languages still functional in Canada.
Make sure you catch the full interview with Arnold Fox from the Blood Tribe and BCN's Jeanette Rocher coming up in the second half of our newscast. New research data from Neuron Mobility has revealed that 6% of its e-scooter riders have a disability or mobility issue. Neuron has programs in 17 Canadian cities, including Calgary, Red Deer, and right here in Lethbridge. The data is from Neuron's rider surveys, which were conducted between July and November of last year. There were over 2,600 responses from various Canadian cities.
And in this case here, we found that there's a number of riders that have told us that these devices are really helpful to get around, to get to work or to go to school and that sort of thing. And so, these are a lot of things that people might not see. Somebody might have MS or asthma. And so an e-scooter is a bit of a lifeline in being a little more mobile in the community and getting to where they need to go. And so what we've seen is that many of these trips would not have occurred if an e-scooter wasn't available, and they wouldn't be able to participate in local community initiatives or make it to work or be more active in the community if an e-scooter wasn't available.
According to officials with Neuron, some riders who appreciated the scooters were also reportedly suffering from conditions such as fibromyalgia, scoliosis, and other chronic pain. Japan has approved its first drug to help battle dementia, including Alzheimer's. The drug Leqembi was jointly developed with the United States.
アルツハイマー病のこの原因物質に働きかける画期的な新薬であり、認知症の治療は新たな時代を迎えたと考えています。
And hopefully it works. So many people with dementia. Well, it was a perfect day to enjoy barbecue here in southwestern Alberta. Beautiful fall temperatures across much of the region. The mercury, however, will be dropping a little bit fairly soon. A full look at the weather pictures coming up. Well, it was another beautiful fall day here in Lethbridge. A great time for taking out your skateboard or longboard if you're so inclined or you're young enough. Jeanette Rocher is now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, for those who love the great outdoors, it should remain mild for a while, but the mercury may be dropping as well soon.
Yeah, cooler definitely, but I'd also say seasonal as well, as we're going to be getting into those teens. We're still sticking around higher than averages, especially for Wednesday, but we're going to feel it definitely after that 24-degree day that we had today. Starting Wednesday, we're looking at a high of 19 degrees. That's where we're going to start to see that cooling trend a little bit, but 19 is still higher than the average high for this time of year of 18 degrees. And then we're going to be getting into 17 for a high, 15 on Friday, and then now down to only 11 degrees on Saturday with mainly cloudy skies, and then back up to 15 on Sunday and up to 18 degrees on Monday. So not a bad week before us, I would say, certainly. Average high for this time of year, 18 degrees, average low, 3 degrees. 32 degrees, that was our high temperature that happened back in 1943 and in 1965. We were sitting at -4. 7:24, that's when the sun rose this morning. Sunset this evening at 7:21. We're looking at just under 12 hours of daylight now, 11 hours, 57 minutes to be exact. Okay, 14 for a high in Victoria tomorrow, looking at periods of rain in the morning and then 30% chance of showers by the afternoon. 16 for a high in Vancouver, also looking at 30% chance of showers. Edmonton could also see some showers, high of 18 degrees there, high of 17 tomorrow in Calgary. Mainly sunny in the morning, and then we're going to see a bit of cloud coverage by the afternoon. Beautiful days, though, expected in Saskatoon. Look at all these 20s happening here. 22 for a high in Saskatoon. Saskatoon, looking at showers in the morning and then clearing by the afternoon. Also 30 to 50K winds, though. 20 to 40K winds in Regina, high of 23 degrees, though. Partly cloudy skies and a high of 21 in Winnipeg with clear skies, 30 to 50K winds. So lovely weather, just a bit windy. That's about it, though. In the central part of the country, 21 for both Ottawa and Montreal, clear skies there as well, and a high of 20 degrees in Toronto with a mix of sun and clouds. So should be fairly decent across the central part of the country as well. Atlantic Canada, okay, we are seeing a frost advisory in effect for both Fredericton and Charlottetown overnight, and that's going to result in some frost patches by the morning. They should be dissipating, though, before noon, and then after that, mainly sunny skies to 21 for a high in Fredericton, 20 for a high in Halifax, 18 is the expected high tomorrow in Charlottetown. And in St. John's, we're looking at a high of 13 degrees with partly cloudy skies. There you have it. That is your forecast.
Canada's largest private sector union opened talks with General Motors. This comes after Unifor members voted to accept the union's new 3-year labor agreement with Ford. The 54% favorable vote, however, was in stark contrast to support for the previous contract, which has experts speculating that reaching deals with GM and Stellantis could prove more challenging. York University labor expert Stephen Tufts says the relatively low support for the Ford deal raises the question of whether workers will accept the template. Unifor's negotiations with GM covers around 4,300 unionized workers at 3 sites in St. Catharines, Oshawa, and Woodstock, Ontario. Experts in presidential and U.S. labor history say they cannot recall an instance where a sitting president has joined in an ongoing strike. U.S. President Joe Biden did just that on Tuesday when he joined in the 12th day of the United Auto Workers strike against the major car makers. His trip to Michigan came a day before former President Donald Trump will make his own visit to meet with striking UAW members. Biden has repeatedly sided with the UAW during their strike, saying recently that the workers should participate in the car makers' riches now that the industry is roaring back. Trans Mountain's application to modify its pipeline's route has been approved by the Canada Energy Regulator. The ruling came Monday, 1 week after the regulator heard arguments from Trans Mountain and a BC First Nation group that opposes the route change. The decision spares an extra $86 million and a possible 9-month delay in construction of the government-owned pipeline project by allowing it to slightly alter the route for a 1.3-kilometer stretch in the Jacko Lake area near Kamloops. Trans Mountain has said it ran into engineering difficulties in the area related to the construction of a tunnel. The regulator says it will publicize the reasons for its decision in the coming weeks. Shareholders of Pipestone Energy Corporation will vote this week on a buyout deal that could create Canada's 5th largest oil producer. Privately held Strathcona Resources has offered to buy out Pipestone in an all-stock deal. Now, if the deal does move ahead, the combined company would have an initial market capitalization of $8.6 billion. The deal would also see Strathcona, one of North America's fastest-growing oil and gas producers, go public. Pipestone's board supports the deal and is urging its shareholders to vote yes, but a major shareholder, GMT Capital, says the deal undervalues Pipestone and it's urging shareholders to vote against it. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 244 points on the day to finish at 19,556. The Dow was down 388 points to 33,618. The S&P 500 was down 63 on the day to 4273, and the Nasdaq was down 207 points to 13,063. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 71 cents to $90.39 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 2 cents to $2.66 US. Gold was up 5 cents on the day to $1,900.70 US an ounce, and silver was down 29 cents to $22.85 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $9.52 per bushel, barley's at $7.29, canola's at $16.19, and corn is at $8.90 per bushel. Live cattle October contract was down $2.18 to $184.80. Feeder cattle were down $1.28 to $252.60, and lean hogs October contract was up a dime to $81.63. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to $73.99 US. Recapping one of our top stories, the federal government says rental construction will soon increase by 30,000 units per year. This comes as Ottawa unlocks another $20 billion for low-cost rental construction financing. The federal government's annual limit of $40 billion on its Canada Mortgage Bonds program is being increased to $60 billion. Industry analysts say the shortage of purpose-built rentals is eroding housing affordability across the country. It was surprising that the federal Conservatives did not call on the resignation of House Speaker Anthony Rota like the NDP did. That's according to political reporter Brian Lilly and Sun columnist Mr. Lilly. He'll have details for us in just a moment. When you see news happening in your community, be sure to drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. And if you missed any of today's local stories, visit our website, bridgecitynews.ca. There's still a lot of talk about the international incident which embarrassed Canada when a 98-year-old man who served with the Nazi Waffen SS in the Second World War was celebrated as a war hero on Parliament Hill. And it took place around the same time that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed Parliament. Now, to chat about this debacle in more detail is political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilly, who joins us once again from Toronto. Now, Brian, many are calling for House Speaker Anthony Rota, who invited the 98-year-old Jaroslav Hunka to resign. The NDP and Bloc have said that Rota needs to step down, but not the Conservatives or Liberals.
There's been plenty came forward and said he's got to go. And look, you can't survive when you've got cabinet ministers like Karina Gould, the Liberal House leader, saying he's got to go. Minister of Foreign Affairs Melanie Joly saying he has to go. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau asked about it and saying, well, Mr. Rota should think about what he's done. Those were all signs that, Rota was not going to have the support of MPs. And, when you are speaker, you serve at the pleasure of your fellow MPs. It's not an appointment. You actually have to win an election. And in a minority parliament, you have to win election across party lines. And Anthony Rota was successful in doing that, at the beginning of this parliament for the last two. But it has not been easy over these last few days.
So, Brian, who would have been responsible once again for making sure that this individual Hunka was vetted properly?
I think there's dual responsibility for both the Speaker and for the Prime Minister in his office. Look, from a security point of view, things have changed. It used to be that the Speaker was solely responsible for security. In fact, I remember the days when there was a House of Commons police force and a Senate police force. They were separate. They reported to the respective speakers. Now there's the Parliamentary Protective Services branch, which reports to the RCMP, which reports to the government. And there's even a memorandum of understanding signed by the Speaker of the House, the Speaker of the Senate, the RCMP, and the Minister of Public Safety making those changes. And those were brought in after the 2014 terrorist attack. So there is a government angle to this. It's not just the Speaker the way it has been for decades and decades past. There's also the political side. This was a wartime leader coming to address the Canadian Parliament in a joint session. He's a man who is wanted. The Russians would love to take him out, would love to see Vladimir Zelensky killed. And so you've got to be looking at who's there from a security standpoint, but also is there anyone there who could embarrass him? Because in the end, that's what this has done. And you've got Russia going around saying, see, we told you there were Nazis. Now they're celebrating.
And this week, Pierre Poilievre called for the House to condemn the incident and the government, while the Liberals asked to have the incident erased?
Yeah, two competing motions looking for unanimous consent in the House of Commons. Pierre Poilievre asked for the incident to be condemned, but also called for the government to be condemned. And of course, when you put language like that in there, you know that government MPs are not going to vote to condemn their own party, their own government. But so he did that just before question period. And I quite frankly think both the incident and the government do need to be condemned. The Speaker already has been by all sides. The Speaker, apologized on Monday, but the government's not taking any responsibility. So I think Poilievre was right. So he put that forward just before question period on Monday. The Liberals said no and asked for unanimous consent. Right after question period, Karina Gould, the Liberal House leader, stands up and asks for unanimous consent to strike the comments honoring Mr. Hunka from the parliamentary debates. So the debates is the official record, often called Hansard. And They wanted that removed so that it looked like it never happened. Beyond that, she wanted any multimedia, any video, any audio recordings of this deleted as well. I mean, that is changing history. That is right up there with saying we got to burn the record so that we can't acknowledge this happened. The Conservatives said no to that, and several of them gave speeches explaining why. So, look, this has just been handled badly from beginning to end by the Trudeau government. He's got one headache piled on top of the other at a time when he had a full plate of headaches before this all came out.
Brian, there's still tension as well between Canada and its spat with India over the killing of Sikh separatist leader Hardeep Singh Nijjar, June 18th in Surrey, British Columbia. It's been more than a week since the allegation that India was involved in the killing of Nijjar. Where do we stand now?
We have nothing more coming forward. We've just had back and forth between the Trudeau government and the Modi government in India. The Trudeau government saying, well, look, we want your help with this investigation. India says, fine, show us some information. You haven't given us anything. We've got the opposition parties, all of them saying, okay, we'll back you, but we need to see some evidence. We need to see something that you're basing this claim on. And that hasn't happened. Now, I've called for some evidence to be released, Hal. I've been told that that's taking a position in support of India. I don't think so. If the government has evidence, they've already made the accusation public. If they have evidence and they put it forward, it doesn't have to be the whole case, but part of it, that would force the Modi government's hand. They'd have to respond. It would also give greater pressure, add greater pressure to our allies like the Americans, the Australians, the Brits, to step forward with strong comments. Remember, they haven't made strong comments. They've said things like they have deep concern. That's not much stronger than saying, well, thoughts and prayers. It's something people say, but there isn't necessarily an action behind it. And that's kind of where our allies are at. So putting some evidence forward, I think, would help. They haven't done that. And the Indian media continue to mock Canada, to take Canada on, to put out more information about Hardeep Singh Nijjar and say, see, this is why it's all right that he was killed. It's almost as if they're saying they did it. And you've got the Canadian government just standing idly by while they're attacked in the Indian media, biggest English-speaking media market in the world.
Brian, the Alberta government is claiming more than half of the Canada pension plan, around $343 billion, as its own. Premier Daniel Smith says before our province even thinks about leaving the CPP for an Alberta pension plan, a referendum must be held on the subject. What would negotiations look like between Alberta and Ottawa if our province wanted to opt out?
Well, I think that, Quebec already runs its own pension plan. I'm not one of these Eastern Canadians or Central Canadians who sits there and says, tut, 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 what do they think they are in Alberta? They can't have their own pension plan. Quebec already has one. Sure, Alberta's been in the Canada pension plan for a long time. It would be messy. Constitutionally, it is provincial purview, although that was surrendered at the time of the creation of the CPP. So court-wise, maybe there'd be a fight. But, if they end up leaving, if Alberta says we're going to go, then there would be tough negotiations because I'll tell you that there is a solid argument for Alberta to get more out of the CPP than just a, per capita apportionment. Higher incomes, younger population, all of these things, higher participation rate for both men and women for most of the last several decades. So yeah, there's an argument to get more, but for a population of just about 5 million to claim more than half, that would not sit well. And I don't think the math would back it up, even with those other factors that I just mentioned. So I think it's an opening salvo by Danielle Smith in negotiations that haven't even started yet.
Brian, last week there were rallies held across the country in support of 1 Million March for Children. Now, for the most part, things were fairly peaceful. I mean, there was the odd tussle here and there with a number of counter-protesters, but the rhetoric from the federal Liberals appeared quite openly hostile towards parents. That can't be a good move, considering that the Tories have, like a 10% lead right now in the polls?
And it's going to alienate groups that have voted for them in the past. I don't know what the rallies were like where you are, but I was at the one in the center of Toronto, in Queen's Park at the legislature. I did think there was going to be serious violence at one point because the small tussles looked like they were going to break out, but full kudos to Toronto police who did a great job keeping the two opposing sides apart. But, you know, I saw turban Sikh fathers at the rally. I saw Muslim mothers in their hijabs at the rally. I saw people from all backgrounds at the rally saying, leave our kids alone. The Trudeau government turned around and said, these are hate-filled rallies. This is a hateful position. The Muslim Association of Canada, which has been close to the Trudeau government at times over the years, they've come out with a statement blasting all politicians, but in particular the Prime Minister, for their characterization of parents. Look, I think there are extremes on both sides, but I think most sensible Canadians could sit down and figure out how to do this, how to deal with this issue in a way that respects parents, in a way that respects students who are dealing with issues, in a way that doesn't put teachers in a bind. I mean, I know I've heard from teachers who look at the policies that are currently in place in some schools and say, this is really uncomfortable for me. So I think there are ways to do it, but the Trudeau government has taken an extremist position on this issue. And we know that because of the polling done by the Angus Reid Institute, which shows even more support for parents' rights than was shown in the Leger poll that was done back in May. And that's after months of being told that parental rights is controversial. Support went up. So I think that they run a real risk of alienating core groups of voters for them, alienating parents across the political spectrum. And I don't think it's a good idea. I think it causes more division. It will inflame passions and create hate that may not have been there otherwise.
You know, a lot of the rallies stemmed around the SOGI, or the sexual orientation, gender identity, that's being implemented in schools now. It's not actual curriculum from the province here in Alberta, but it's a resource or a tool that students can access. So that's kind of the controversy surrounding that around SOGI. What have you been hearing?
It's mostly around those issues. You know, I heard from a lot of parents last week saying that the way some of the school boards want to push the issue, that it causes confusion, it upsets students, and especially in the younger years, that this is just simply not appropriate. As I say, I think that most sensible parents and educators and folks could just sit down and sort this out. But it's being driven by an extremist ideology. Let's not reply to it with a different extremism. Let's just deal with it in a common sense way, the way most Canadians, I think, are fully capable of doing.
Brian, we've heard the expression axe the tax for quite some time from the Conservative Party of Canada. Pierre Poilievre has been harping on this for quite some time now. Is there any talk by the Trudeau government of potentially eliminating the federal carbon tax to help give Canadians a much-needed break right now?
Sadly, no. But what's funny is, of course, this was just implemented in Atlantic Canada. And a week later, the clean fuel standards took effect again in Atlantic Canada, and there were huge spikes in gas prices. Well, that has led to a huge drop in support in the public opinion polls for the Liberals. So Liberal MPs from Atlantic Canada are now saying, well, can you give our region a carve-out? Can you just exempt us? And, you know, I can't see them doing, well, actually, I could see them doing it for political reasons, but then that would anger the rest of the country. That would anger voters in Ontario who are subject to the provincial backstop, or sorry, the federal backstop. It would anger voters in Saskatchewan and Alberta, where the Liberals don't get a lot of support, but they do need the support in Ontario. It wouldn't actually impact British Columbia because they have their own, so they're not under the federal tax. So it's kind of an odd hodgepodge, but that's the only thing that I've heard is Atlantic Canadian Liberal MPs trying to say, boss, you gotta cut that. You gotta axe that tax in Atlantic Canada, or we're getting the axe.
Brian, yeah, are we going to go to the polls anytime soon? Or is Jagmeet Singh going to hang in there supporting the coalition until the year 2025, when he gets his full pension?
I can't see the Liberals wanting to go to the polls right now. You've got the India debacle, you've got the Nazi debacle, you've got support falling in the polls before that. You've got, there was one poll. Now, I don't believe this poll. Frank Graves from ECOS put out a poll of just 600 people that claimed Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives were at 42% and the Trudeau Liberals were at 22%. I don't buy that poll for a minute, but if things keep up, maybe we'll get there eventually. There's no reason that Trudeau or Singh would want to go to the polls at the moment. And so that, Singh's not going to back a non-confidence motion. He's not going to pull his support. His party would be obliterated along with the Trudeau Liberals. And so you've just got the Bloc and the Conservatives who might want one. And they don't have the votes to try and force an election. So I think Trudeau's going to try and wait things out, try to get the poll numbers up a little higher than they are now, which it wouldn't be hard for them to be higher than what they are for him. He's in the basement. So and do expect that there will be some leveling out. A 14, 15, 12-point lead for Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives, that will be difficult for him to sustain over the long run. Not saying it won't happen, but just remember, voters are fickle and they'll go up and down depending on what they see in the news on any given day. But I wouldn't expect better polls for Justin Trudeau based on the news of the last week.
Political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks so much for joining us today from Toronto.
Thanks.
Well, it is Truth and Reconciliation Week, and we are honoring the Indigenous people and taking a deeper dive into the culture, including the language. I'm pleased to have Arnold Fox joining me today. Arnold is the director of the Blood Tribe Social Services. And welcome, Arnold. We're so grateful to have you with us today.
Happy to be here, Jeanette.
Okay, so why don't you maybe start off by telling me a bit about what you do, what your work kind of looks like over there at Blood Tribe Social Development?
Okay, well, in relation to the Blackfoot Signage Project and in relation to the Blackfoot language, our department stepped forward to host what we eventually called 8 Weeks Language Committee. So 8 weeks means Blackfoot speaking. That's what that phrase, that word means, 8 weeks. So we're the speaking language group. And the task that was given to us, it was instituted a little over 10 years ago, maybe 12 years ago. The major part of our task is to help preserve the Blackfoot language and to help the language itself move along and adapt to current terms that are used today in our everyday language. So that's why it's a dual function. We realize that a lot of First Nations across the country are losing the language. I believe there's some dire predictions that within 25 years, we will just have 3 First Nation languages still functional in Canada.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's quite astounding once you think about it. And I grew up with the Blackfoot was the first language, and I can't really envision not being able to use that or not giving it to our children and our grandchildren to be able to carry forth. So that was the gist of our task in that committee. The committee itself has 10 to 12 elders who come together once a month, and we offer an annual symposium. Blackfoot Language and Symposium in Lethbridge is the most convenient location. There are some representations from other Blackfoot nations in the area, Blackfeet in Montana, the Nation near Pincher Creek, and Siksika near east of Calgary. So those are the Blackfoot-speaking nations in North America.
Fascinating, yeah.
Yeah. So out of that, I would say I'm being optimistic by saying 20% of us still use that language on an everyday basis. So it definitely is in fear of dying at a certain point or not being utilized anymore. So that's what we're hoping to avoid. We're realizing now with the programs that we offer, even in social services, we offer short-term employment training for our clients. And we have fully realized over the years that one of the modules they take is the Blackfoot culture and the Blackfoot language. I used to take for granted that our younger people had this opportunity to learn at home and all of that, but that's not the case. We were, in my generation, we were lucky that there was a very limited amount of influence from media. So the everyday language we heard all the time was Blackfoot, whereas our younger people are inundated with TV, just to start there, radio. Often tell my audiences that when I was growing up in the 50s, 1950s, we had a radio, an old radio that sat on top of a cabinet, and there was a big dry cell battery. So whenever the battery went dead, there went our connection with the outside world.
Sure.
We're particularly insular in those days, so we didn't have all those influences.
Yeah.
Just like one of my nephews, we made a concerted effort to have him speak Blackfoot from the time he started uttering words, and he was doing really good. Hey, we noticed that the words he was uttering up to 2 years of age were Blackfoot, but that's because in the home we had decided, no, he's going to speak Blackfoot. He discovered TV around that age, and what's that? Anyways, he discovered it and was very drawn.
Probably Nickelodeon or, the kids shows, right?
Sesame Street, but they're all in English, eh?
Yeah.
So we realized the influence that our young people have to live with is nothing like what I went through growing up. Mm-hmm. It was comfortable for me to carry on the Blackfoot language, but it's not that for our kids anymore.
No, that's so interesting, and it's so true, and it's something we don't really think about. You were mentioning that they're predicting there could only be 3 indigenous languages left. How many are there? I mean, there must be hundreds, right?
Well, yeah, if you stop to think, there are 500 plus different First Nations in Canada. To get an idea, of course, there's regional, like the Woodland Cree have a big area in most of the provinces. So that language I know will survive because there's a lot of speakers over an extended geographical area. But once you start, like I said, becoming too insular, you don't have that opportunity. And in our population too.
Definitely. So interesting. Now, Arnold, as the director of the Blood Tribe Social Services, I know that you are also involved in a Blackfoot signage project. And just for some background for our viewers, several organizations in southwestern Alberta, I guess, have partnered up with Kainai Nation to fund the construction of Blackfoot language signs across the region. So I guess this is to both enrich the landscape and invite locals and visitors to learn more about the deep history of the region. And I would say have the opportunity to see the translations of certain community names in the Blackfoot language sort of come to life. I find that really interesting. So Arnold, as the director of Blood Tribe Social Services, you're a part of this signage project, which will see these beautiful signs come to life with this language. So tell me more about this project and sort of how it came to be.
Okay, I would like to think that really the idea was planted as part of the TNR, the Truth and Reconciliation. All of the recommendations, I think there was 108 recommendations that came from that. And I've been noticing in southern Alberta, in my world, I travel a lot to Lethbridge. We're not confined. We shop in Fort McLeod, Cardston. So we have a lot of daily interaction with these communities. And the Blackfoot names that were assigned to these communities go way back. Now, there's some newer communities that we're going to have to sit with the elders to develop the name. So South Row is the name of the organization that invited me to join. And so I did. And I didn't really know at first what the extent of the program was. But in our first couple of meetings, I've grown to appreciate that this is a really worthwhile effort for Southern Alberta. I don't think there's enough we can do to further the relations between the population here, the Blackfoot or blood population on Guyana, and the surrounding communities. There's been some excellent relationships that have developed over the years. I can two at this point that are kind of related to what we're doing. It just emphasizes more communication, positive in a positive light. So that's what we're doing with these. Now we're going to open it up. It's open to towns and counties. You know how when you enter a county, you see a little sign?
like welcome to Tabor or Cardston or
So those are the two kind of that are foremost. Certainly welcome to look at other, but for those two, for the towns and the counties, we're definitely looking and hoping to get applications from them to this on this signage. I'm thinking it's another opportunity for us to interact with the wider population. And there's another initiative that's looking at racism and working with the mayors of the surrounding towns and trying to establish a common footing to address the racism. Now, there was another project I was thinking of, but those give you an idea that there's more activity, there's more interaction between the Blood community and the surrounding. We've utilized the towns, like I said, for shopping. 50% of our kids are bused off the Blood Reserve to the surrounding communities to attend school. So there's a great deal of interaction, and we just want to try and do our part to ensure that there's more positive chances than there are for negative interaction.
Yeah, no, it's such a fabulous idea, and I just look forward to seeing these new signs going up. And I believe the project is inviting communities, businesses, institutions to take part. And what they can do is, I believe they can apply. Is it a $2,000 grant that they can receive for the creation of this sign, right?
With the stipulation they throw in 500, so we're offering them 80% funding for the sign. Yeah. So I should mention also, Jeanette, that I explained to the committee that I'm working, to the signage committee, that there are names for some of the older communities in Southern Alberta, but it's not always a direct translation. There's something that strikes our elders that's peculiar about this, and that sometimes they go with that. I'll give you an example, Tabor.
Okay.
Because Tabor sounds similar to table.
Okay.
That's actually that our name for Tabor is Idasuyo, which means something we eat on, which was the name we gave. It's not, whereas Fort McLeod, Agapioyus, means many houses. So that's where the fort was established, and then the community started growing. So we refer to it as many houses. So that's been historically the name. Yes, and Lethbridge, Sikoho, Black Rock, for the coal mining history that Lethbridge was the central part of in Southern Alberta. So it would be a direct translation or just a similar sounding word in the English language, like Tabor. Right?
I've also been told, Arnold, that you're a wealth of information when it comes to the language, the Blackfoot language, and particularly how some of the language has had to sort of adapt over the years to accommodate more for modern words, almost like, like the technology that we use, like computers, cell phones, because those weren't around, obviously, back when the Blackfoot language was coming to be. I'd love it if you could tell me a little bit more about that.
So we, at the annual symposium where we gather the reps mainly from Ghana, from Blood, but like I said, the three other Blackfoot nations always have reps there. So one session is always devoted, we call it coining new phrases, coining new So the audience is invited. We always limit it to around 200, 225, and it's always full. We have to turn people away. So we know it's been a very popular symposium over the years. So in opening up that one session, we invite the audience to submit words that they would like translated. And we'd like to make a difference at this point between translation and interpretation. So we offer both. We can interpret word for word, but sometimes that doesn't necessarily work. So sometimes we have to interpret what the speaker is trying to say and then issue our word for it or develop our word for it. Okay. So that's been a major part of our work in bringing the community together. And what we want to do is, when we have enough of these new words, publish them in a booklet so people can use them for easy reference. There's been a number of other organizations that have developed apps for the Blackfoot language. So you just go into that and you get the translation for the, well, not the translate, the pronunciation. Okay. Mm-hmm. And the translation or interpretation of. So there's a lot of tools that are available out there for people who are interested to start learning it. So texting at our second last symposium, we said, okay, everybody, even our seniors use texts nowadays, eh? So we said, okay, how do we translate it? And the most accepted one in the symposium seemed to be Steckam Sinakyo, an object or a process where you write fast. So that's how we.
Okay. So it interprets into process where you write fast. Texting. Maybe not for all of us, though. Especially when you get those clumsy thumbsies, you know, and you're like, have to go back. That's not what I meant to say. Arnold, it looks like we're about out of time, but thank you so much for joining me today and having this really fun conversation about, you know, some of the interpretation of Blackfoot language. It's really interesting.
Okay, well, I hope we have a chance as we move further along. I can report how many communities have taken us up on our offer, etc. Yeah.
I would love to hear that. Thanks so much, Arnold. Okay. Arnold Fox is the Director of Blood Tribe Social Services. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.